In this video I'm going to show you how to make this really handy little storage pouch. Now it fastens with a bow at the side here with a couple of pieces of ribbon. On the inside I've made two pockets here, one large pocket underneath and one zipped pocket which is lined on the front as well. So it's actually a very simple and quick make, but I think you'll find it really useful whether you're storing your cosmetics or documents, or you could put your mobile phone in there. You could make that into pen pockets, so you could kind of tailor make it for whatever it is that you need to store. And it's very simple to resize it as well, so if you wanted to make it smaller, make it larger, you can simply increase or decrease the size of the fabrics that you're using. Right, so let's get going. All of your cutting instructions, by the way, are going to be underneath the video in the description box. You may have to click on see more and I'll list all of the items that I've used. I have used a G700 interfacing on this one, which is a Velisaline product. If you wanted to make this a little bit firmer, then I'd suggest you use a fusible fleece, H630, H640, Boseal fusible fleece, or the firm fleece that we have on the website. But I wanted this to be quite soft, shall we say, but that's up to you. You can change that if you wanted to. So these are all of the pieces that I've already cut out. So I've got my two outer pieces and I have put the G700 on the wrong side of both pieces. G700 is woven interfacing, so it'll give the pouch a little bit of structure, but it'll still keep it soft. I think you will need some kind of interfacing on the back of your fabric to give it a little bit of firmness. So two pieces to exactly the same size there. Then I have two pieces of the outer fabric cut to the pocket size, which again both pieces have the G700 on the wrong side. And then three pieces of lining fabric, and only one of those you need the G700. These two don't have the G700 on them. Those are going to be for the lining of the zipped pocket. And of course my zip, which is a little bit too long. I do that a lot and I find it easier to work with the longer zip. And then you've got your two pieces of ribbon for tying as well. So let's do the zipped pocket first of all. So I'm going to take one of my outer pieces, again that has the G700 on the back, and one of the lining pieces. Then I'll need my cutting mat. And we're going to place both of these pieces together and then cut to where the zip's going to go here. So that will be 4.5 inches from the bottom. And I'm just going to take my rotary cutter and cut straight across there. And then we can put the zip in the center. So take the outer pieces first of all, and we're going to sew the larger section to the bottom of the zip. So the zip goes right sides down, so the slider is facing downwards, and match up the edge of the zip to the edge of the fabric. If you wanted to use a glue stick to hold that in place, then do feel free, or you could tack or baste it if you wish. I tend not to. I'm just going to move the needle over on my sewing machine to the left hand side, which you'll find a lot of domestic sewing machines can do. And then I can sew straight down the center of the zip tape, sorry, without sewing over the zip. And all I'm doing is lining up the edge of the zip tape with the edge of the fabric as I sew. And then we'll take the shorter half and sew that right sides together to the top of the zip. So let's flip this over so I can sew from the zip side and line up the edges of the fabric here so that that meets across there, and then sew down. You may have to trim this down a little bit before you complete the whole project, particularly if you're using a wadding or a fusible fleece, because sometimes they can kind of move a little bit, but don't worry about that. I'll explain more shortly. So we have this, and then the lining needs to go on the opposite side. So let's take the top piece first of all, right sides together to the top of the zip. So I have the zip sandwiched in between the two pieces, line up the two edges, so line up here, and we'll sew down the centre of the zip tape. This is why I like to do it in two halves, because I can now see the stitches that I've already sewn, and I can just sew straight over the top. Again, if you find that easier to use a glue stick, or to tack, or to pin, or to baste, then that's up to you. I just find this a much easier way of being accurate. Line it up as you go, and sew these one piece at a time. I know you can sew both pieces of fabric to each side of the zip at the same time. I find it more accurate to sew these separately, even though it may take a little more time to do that. So then the final piece of the lining goes on the bottom section. So that again goes right sides together. So the zip's in the centre, outer fabric on one side, lining on the other. Line up the edges here, and then we'll sew straight down the centre of the zip tape again, following the stitch line that I've already made. And then we'll give it a press. Just bring up my mat. Let's open up these sections, pull the fabric away from the zip and press that. You can see I've had a little bit of movement on the lining fabric. This is what I was saying about trimming this down to size later on. So don't worry if this happens. This isn't a garment that you're going to wear that has to fit perfectly. We can afford to take a few millimetres or half an inch or so off the outside of this if we need to. Now I'm going to top stitch across the top and the bottom. So I can move my needle back to the centre position and just sew. This will hold the layers of fabric in place, and it also looks nice. You could use a contrast coloured thread to make that top stitching really stand out. If you're a confident top stitcher, that would work. And down this side. And then we can trim off the ends of the zip. Make sure that your zip slider is in here, not on the end here when you chop this off. And I'm just going to trim that excess fabric down a little bit where it seems to have stretched a little bit. Then we're going to take another lining piece that doesn't have any interfacing, and we want this to sit behind the pocket with the right side facing up. So we're going to sew this right side to wrong side, which seems a bit alien, but that's the way that it works. And we're just going to sew across the top. And again, if you want to pop a few pins in there to hold it in place, then that would work well. And I'm just using a 1/4 inch seam allowance for this one, or a 6mm seam allowance. Again, that doesn't matter if it's a little bit out, as long as you're consistent. Then we need to press this again. So let's fold that out of the way first of all. It seems a bit odd, doesn't it, having the fabric the wrong way around? It's not what we're used to seeing. But now when we fold this over, with that seam right on the top, inside here you're going to see the right side of the lining fabric behind the zip. So again, we'll give that another press, and then I'll top stitch across the edge here. And that'll be this bit finished. So now let's make up the second pocket. So I have my outer and my lining pieces, and we're going to sew these right sides together. These have both got interfacing on the wrong side. We're going to sew these together across the top. If you're using a firmer interfacing or a fusible fleece, you may not want to put the fleece on both sides of the pockets. It may be a little bit too thick for the pockets. It'll work, but it may not be necessary to actually do that. Then we'll take the ironing mat again, open this out, and press, and then fold this over so that the seam is at the top again, and press, and then I'm going to top stitch again just across the and then take the lining section of the larger piece of fabric, and I'm going to place my pocket over one side or one end. And actually, let's fold that in half now and crease the centre line. You could measure and mark that if you like, but it's just as easy to fold it and crease it. And we'll have a couple of pins in here. And I'm going to sew straight down the centre of the pocket and then just a little bit at the sides just to hold that in place. So I'm just sewing over that crease line. And as I said in the introduction, you can make as many dividing lines as you like. So if you wanted to make this a pen pocket, if you wanted to keep it as one large pocket, then that's fine. All I'm doing here is to sew within the seam allowance just at the side to hold the ends of the pockets down. And then I've got my two pockets in the centre there. I can take my pins out now and place the zipped pocket over the opposite end. Pin that in place, and I'm just going to sew down the side sections again just to hold that in place. I'm not sewing the bottom as yet because we need to put the ribbons on in just a second. And across this side, and that's within the seam allowance, so quite close to the edge of the fabric, and now these pins can come out. Then we'll take our ribbon pieces, mark the centre of each side, and the ribbon is going to face inwards to the centre. So let's pin this in here. And the same on this side. That should be exactly where I've sewn the dividing pocket, so I know where the centre is there. Facing inwards. And pin. I'm just going to tuck this excess ribbon inside the pockets so it's out of the way while I construct the rest of the bag. And then I'm going to sew across the bottom sections to hold that in place. And then I can take out the pins. And then we'll take the outer section of the whole thing and place this right sides together. This will all be trimmed down, so don't worry if it doesn't match exactly. I think you tend to find when you've got lots of layers of fabric like this, sometimes when you're sewing, even with a walking foot on your machine, sometimes they seem to grow. And it's not by very much, it won't make any difference to the size or the functionality of your folder. So we'll trim that shortly. Now I do need to leave a turning gap, so I'm going to sew all the way around the edge. I may leave a turning gap in the side here, just so I can turn it the right side out. So out come the pins. And now I can trim back any unevenness back to the seam, and while we're there we'll just snip across the corners. A little bit here, And that's the last corner. And then we'll turn this the right side out. I'm just going to use my turning tool to get right into those corners to push them through. So they won't be absolutely perfectly square because there's such a lot of bulk of fabric there. But nice to get those as pointy as we can. Oops. And then we'll give it another press. So I have the turning gap in the side here. I'm going to press this. I'm just going to fold the edges inwards because that's going to make it easier when I sew. And give that a good old press with steam. And then I'm going to sew all the way around the edge of the pouch, and that'll close it over. So I'm going to lengthen my stitch now because this is a top stitch, and it'll help when you've got lots of layers of fabric just to make the stitch a little bit longer. So I'm going up to a 2.8 and then literally just sew all the way around the edge. Now when you come to the zip section here, you've got a lot of fabric and you've got a zip that's rolled over on itself. So if you find that's a little bit thick, slow down with your sewing machine. You may have to ease this a little bit from the back, and if your machine does struggle with thicker areas, here's another one. You can always turn the hand wheel towards you by hand to help that go underneath. It may help if you use a denim needle in your sewing machine. I haven't here, this is a universal needle. And it's coping with the thickness of fabrics very well. But if you use a denim needle, they're a stronger needle, and that can really help with thick or lots of layers of fabric. So I'm coming down to the turning gap here, so I'll just make sure that those edges are together. And you go. And I'm sewing quite close to the edge, over that thick bit. Just a little bit of help over that area there and over the zip. Again, take it slowly when you go over the zip. It may sound rather noisy, and you may be able to hear that on my sewing machine as well. That's because of the thickness of the fabric that we're sewing through. Don't worry about that. You're not damaging your machine, it's just purely lots of layers of fabric being sewn through. And then back down the final side here. And then we'll snip away any little threads of fabric that are, thought I saw one there, that are sticking out. Tidy it up a little bit. There's one. Don't know where they come from, but they're always there. So snip that away. And we're finished. So again, we've got the two pockets on the one side, a large pocket underneath here. Your zip pocket is nicely lined, and then we'll simply fold this over and tie the two ribbons into a bow. If you need to trim those a little bit, then do that after you've tied the bow. I kind of quite like them long like that. There's the thread I was looking for. Let's snip that away, snip that away. And that's another pouch finished. So I think you'll agree they are rather quick makes. So if you're making lots of gifts, if you're making things to sell, there's another one, then you'll be able to make these actually very quickly. But for yourself, just as a document organizer, I think you'll find them very useful as well. So I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. I hope you make lots of them, sell lots of them, and enjoy making every one of them. I'll see you again soon. Bye bye.